In a world split by the chasms of money and power, it's dangerously easy to forget that one single, desperate moment can forge a link between the poorest person and the wealthiest man. We construct walls of wealth and influence, believing they're impenetrable, strong enough to keep the clamor of other people's problems out. But what happens when the very person you shove away holds the key to a forgotten debt, a promise buried under 2 decades of ambition? Arthur Vance, a titan of industry who saw the world in the stark, unforgiving columns of profits and losses, was about to receive a lesson in a different kind of accounting. He was about to learn that the most critical debts never show up on a balance sheet, and the bill was coming due. The afternoon sun glinted off the steel and glass of Vance Tower, a monument to its owner's ego, so tall it seemed to pin the sky to the earth. But down on the pavement, in the canyon of its immense shadow, a whole different kind of fight for survival was unfolding. "Please, sir, just one moment of your time." The voice was thin, strained, and nearly swallowed by the city's roar, but it was laced with a desperate urgency that cut through the noise like a shard of glass. Maya, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, her face a pale mask of fear and profound exhaustion, slipped past a stunned security guard who had moved to block her. Her eyes, wide and blazing with a terrifying mix of hope and despair, were locked on just one man, Arthur Vance. He was standing by the open door of his gleaming black town car, a chariot of modern luxury, a phone pressed to his ear. His face was a study in pure irritation. He was a king in his kingdom of concrete and commerce, and this girl was a weed, a disruption growing through the pristine cracks in his perfect sidewalk. "Mr. Vance." "Please, I'm begging you," she cried, her voice cracking. She clutched a worn-out manila folder to her chest, as if it were a life raft in a stormy sea. "My brother? He's sick. He needs help. Your company, your subsidiaries. You fund cutting-edge medical research. Please look at his case." Arthur Vance snapped his call shut with a flick of his thumb, the sharp click echoing his impatience. He turned his gaze on her, and it was as cold and unforgiving as a winter ocean. His eyes, the color of slate, swept over her worn clothes, her frayed backpack, and the desperation carved into the lines of her young face. He didn't see a person. He saw a problem, a nuisance, an unwelcome variable in a perfectly controlled day. "I don't have time for beggars," he said, his voice low and sharp. Each word was a perfectly polished piece of contempt designed to dismiss and discard. "Whatever sob story you've cooked up to get my attention, I'm not interested." "Get out of my way!" Hot, shameful tears welled in Maya's eyes, but she fought them back. "It's not a story. It's real. His name is Leo. He's only 12 years old. The doctors? They said this experimental therapy is his only chance. It's all in here." With a trembling hand, she thrust the folder forward, the papers inside representing her last ember of hope. Vance didn't even glance at it. He let out a short, humorless laugh, a bark of derision that made the gathering onlookers flinch. "You think you're the first one to try this? Show up with a folder full of lies hoping for a handout?" He reached into the pocket of his tailored suit, not with an ounce of kindness, but with a theatrical show of absolute dismissal. He pulled out a thick wad of cash from his money clip, peeled off several crisp $100 bills, and crumpled them in his fist with a deliberate, insulting cruelty. He threw the money at her feet. The bills were scattered across the dirty sidewalk like dead leaves. "Here!" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Take your payment for this little street performance and disappear. Tell your brother to find a better business model. Now get her out of my sight," he barked at the security guard, who moved forward, his expression uneasy as he took Maya's arm. The humiliation hit her like a physical punch, stealing the air from her lungs. Maya stared at the money on the ground, a garish symbol of her total and utter defeat. The crowd whispered, their phones held up to capture the brutal spectacle. Arthur Vance didn't give her a second glance. He slid into the plush leather of his car and the door shut with a heavy final thud. As the car pulled away from the curb, he was already on his next call, his voice sharp and commanding. The entire incident already forgotten, deleted from his mind like a bad data file. Maya was left alone in the cold shadow of his tower, the whispers of the crowd ringing in her ears. She knelt, her body shaking with a potent cocktail of rage and shame, and began to pick up the crumpled bills. Because as much as it burned her soul, as much as every fiber of her being screamed in protest, she knew she had no choice. For her brother Leo, she would endure anything. The ride back to her tiny apartment was a suffocating blur. Every lurch and stop the rattling city bus made felt like a fresh wave of shame washing over her. The faces of the other passengers, tired and anonymous, seemed to mock her, their eyes reflecting the girl they saw scrambling for cash on a billionaire's sidewalk. Maya clutched the folder in one hand and the crumpled bills in the other. The paper of one and the cash of the other felt equally dirty, equally stained by the encounter. She and her brother lived on the 5th floor of a walk-up apartment in a part of the city that tourist maps didn't show. The building's hallway was a gauntlet of peeling paint and the smell of damp, interwoven with a dozen different dinners from a dozen other lives. But for them it was home. It was their sanctuary, the only place they had left in the world after their parents were gone. She pushed the door open as quietly as she could, hoping Leo was asleep. But from the single bedroom, a weak voice called out, "Maya, is that you?" Maya took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing a mask of optimism onto her face before he could see her. She wiped the last traitorous tear from her cheek and walked into the room. Leo was propped up in bed, surrounded by a fortress of pillows to help his breathing. His skin was ashen, but his eyes, large and shockingly full of life, lit up when he saw her. A half-finished drawing of a soaring superhero lay on the worn blanket. "You were gone for a long time," he said, his voice a little raspy. Did you meet him? The big boss?" Maya's heart fractured. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell this brave, hopeful boy that their last chance had looked at her like she was something to be scraped off his expensive shoe. "I did." "Leo," she said, forcing a bright smile that felt like cracking porcelain. She sat on the edge of his bed. "It went, well, it's a big process, you know? These things take time. Big, important CEOs have numerous steps to take, a lot of gatekeepers to navigate. But I made contact. That's the first step, right?" Leo's hopeful look was almost more painful than Vance's scorn. "So he's going to help? He'll fund Dr. Eris's program? Can I get the new medicine?" Each question was a fresh twist of the knife in her heart. "We're getting there, buddy," she lied, her voice thick with tears she refused to let fall. She reached out and smoothed his hair, feeling the feverish warmth of his skin. "I just have to fill out more paperwork." "Lots and lots of boring paperwork." "But I told him all about you. I told him you're the bravest kid I know." He beamed, a radiant smile that transformed his tired face. "I'm not scared, you know. When I get better, I'm going to invent a real jetpack. We can fly away from here. We'll go somewhere with clean air, and you won't have to work 3 jobs anymore." Maya's throat tightened into a knot. She just nodded, unable to speak, her lie caught in her throat. He was the one who was sick, the one in constant pain every single day, and all he could think about was saving her. Later that night, long after Leo's ragged breathing had settled into a fragile, restless sleep, Maya sat at their small, wobbly kitchen table. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the room. She spread out the crumpled $100 bills, smoothing each one with a heavy, aching heart. Beside them, she opened the folder again. It contained Leo's whole life in cold, clinical terms. Blood test results, radiological scans, doctor's notes filled with terrifying phrases like progressive, degenerative, and limited viable options. At the very back was a letter stating that, without access to an experimental gene editing, therapy being pioneered by a small biotech firm, a firm recently acquired by and now wholly owned by Vance Industries, Leo's, prognosis was terminal, staring at a photo clipped to the file, a smiling, healthy Leo from 2 years ago, dirt on his cheek and mischief in his eyes. Before the illness began its relentless theft, a fresh wave of despair washed over her. Arthur Vance hadn't just dismissed her. He hadn't just humiliated her. With his casual, thoughtless cruelty, he had slammed the door on her brother's future. And as she sat there in the silent sleeping apartment, she had no idea what to do next. High above the sleeping city, in a sprawling penthouse that looked more like the command deck of a spaceship than a home, Arthur Vance was pacing. The space was a monument to his absolute power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the glittering urban sprawl, and a silence so profound that it was unsettling. His assistant, a perpetually nervous man named Mr. Harrison, stood stiffly by the door, holding a tablet as if it were a shield. The footage is on 3 major news sites. "Sir," Harrison reported, his voice trembling a little. "User-generated content. They're framing it as, well, the headlines are using words like heartless, callous, billionaire bully." Vance scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled silver hair. "Bad press is temporary, Harrison. It's a gnat-sized distraction. The public has the attention span of a gnat. By tomorrow, they'll be outraged about something else entirely." He took a sip of his 30-year-old single malt whiskey. He wasn't sorry. He was annoyed. This was an inefficiency. "She was a professional, Harrison," Vance continued, his voice dripping with condescending certainty as he lectured his subordinate. "It's a well-known scam. Young girl, sick relative, folder of proof. By throwing money at her, I ended the interaction quickly and decisively. Time is money. My time is worth a great deal of money. Therefore, by a simple calculation, I saved money." "Of course, sir," Harrison mumbled, though he didn't look convinced. "It's just—" She seemed very young, genuinely distraught. Vance shot him a look that could curdle milk. "The young ones are the most effective. They prey on sentiment. And sentiment, Harrison, is a weakness. It has no place in a successful portfolio or a successful life. Now, what's next on the agenda? Dr. Evans from the Sterling Medical Foundation is here for your 2 o'clock, sir?" "Ah, yes. The Legacy Project," Vance said, his mood shifting seamlessly back to business. "A multi-million-dollar donation gets my name on a new research wing and provides a significant tax benefit. A perfect win-win. Let's not keep the good doctor waiting." Vance strode into the adjoining conference room. Dr. Evans, a kind-faced man in his 60s with earnest eyes, rose to greet him. "Arthur, thank you for making the time," the doctor began warmly. "Time is my most valuable asset. James, I trust you're ready to show me precisely why this is a worthy investment," Vance replied, leaving no room for pleasantries or small talk. "Of course," the doctor said, unfazed by the cold reception. He opened his briefcase. "I wanted to show you a specific pressing case. A file that shows exactly the kind of life-changing work your donation could make possible. Effective immediately." Dr. Evans slid a medical file across the polished mahogany table. "This is about a new gene editing therapy our division is developing in partnership with one of your own labs, OmniGen. The potential is immense, but the human trials are costly. We need a flagship case to secure the next round of funding." Vance picked up the file, his interest purely academic. "Just another proposal." He opened it. The first page was a summary sheet. Patient name, Leo Turner. Age 12. Diagnosis, ATML deficiency, a rare cellular decay disorder. Prognosis, 6 to 12 months without intervention. He scanned the words with a detached eye. High risk, high reward. What's the projected success rate? In early models, upwards of 80%, Dr. Evans said, his voice brimming with passion. This boy, Leo, he's the perfect candidate. Genetically speaking, he's an ideal match for the therapy. Saving him wouldn't just be saving one life. It would unlock the door to saving thousands. Vance grunted, flipping a page. His eyes fell on the patient's intake photo, a pale boy with large, hopeful eyes. The face meant nothing to him. He was about to ask about the potential for patentable IP and the return on investment when his thumb brushed the next page. It was the family information and guardianship form. Guardian, Maya Turner, sister. He felt a faint, unpleasant prickle of unease. The name was familiar. It meant nothing. Then his eyes fell on the following line. Father, David Turner, deceased. Mother, Elena Turner, deceased. David Turner. The name hit Arthur Vance like a physical blow. The air was punched from his lungs. The silent, opulent conference room dissolved around him, and he was violently thrown back 20 years, into the roaring chaos of a stormy night. He was younger, more reckless, driving far too fast on a rain-slicked country road. A blind curve, the sickening, high-pitched screech of tires failing to find purchase, followed by the deafening crunch of metal. He remembered the world turning upside down, the smell of gasoline and wet earth filling his senses. His leg was pinned, the pain excruciating. He was trapped. And then a figure appeared through the shattered windshield, silhouetted against the storm. A man in a simple work jacket. "Hang on!" the man had yelled, his voice cutting through the roar of the fire that was starting to lick at the engine block. "I'll get you out!" The man, David Turner, had wrenched the crumpled door open with a surge of pure adrenaline. He'd pulled Arthur from the wreckage just seconds before the car exploded in a whoosh of heat and light. Lying on the wet asphalt, Arthur had looked up at his savior. But the man was hurt, bleeding badly from a wound in his side. David knew he wasn't going to make it. With a trembling hand, he pulled out a worn leather wallet and a small dog-eared photo of a smiling woman holding a baby. "My Elena, and my little girl Maya," David had whispered, his voice fading with each word. He pressed the photo into Arthur's hand. "Promise me." "You'll look out for them. Don't let them be alone," Arthur had promised. In his shock and pain, he had sworn he would. But then the ambulances came. The world of lawyers and boardrooms swept him back up, and the promise began to fade. He sent an anonymous, extensive check to the widow's address, enough, he told himself, to settle the debt. He never followed up. He never checked. He had moved on and built his empire, deliberately forgetting the man who died so that he could live. Back in the conference room, the file slipped from Arthur's numb fingers. It clattered on the vast table, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. Leo Turner, Maya Turner, David Turner's children, the girl he had humiliated, the girl whose brother was dying, the girl he'd thrown money at like she was trash. She wasn't a scammer. She was the daughter of the man to whom he owed his very life, and she had come to him for help, the living embodiment of a sacred promise he had willfully, callously broken. "Arthur, are you all right?" Dr. Evans asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Arthur stared at the doctor, but he saw only David Turner's dying eyes. He heard his own daughter's desperate plea. "Tell your brother to find a better business model." The sheer, unimaginable cruelty of his own words rushed back, suffocating him. He hadn't seen a ghost. He had seen himself, and the reflection was a monster. He had the power to save a life, but chose to shatter a soul instead. Now, faced with the truth, Arthur Vance is at a crossroads. Will he let his shame swallow him whole, or will he fight for the redemption he so clearly doesn't deserve? The race against time has just begun. We're about to see what happens when a broken promise comes back to haunt a powerful man. But first, if you're enjoying this story, be sure to hit the subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this ends. "Find her." The words were a choked, ragged whisper. Dr. Evans stared at him, bewildered. "Arthur, I don't understand." Arthur surged to his feet, the force of his movement knocking his heavy leather chair over with a crash. He ignored the doctor altogether, his wild, terrified eyes fixed on his assistant, who was still hovering by the door. "Harrison!" he roared, his voice cracking with a raw, unfamiliar panic that echoed through the penthouse. "Find that girl. The girl from this morning! Maya Turner! Find her now!" Harrison, who had only ever seen his boss be icy calm or coldly controlled, was stunned into paralysis. "Sir, I don't know where to start. We don't have any information. No name, no address." "Then get it!" Vance thundered, sweeping his arm across the conference table, sending crystal glasses, water pitchers, and stacks of papers flying to the floor in a chaotic crash. "Use everything! Every resource. Security footage. Facial recognition. Check every hospital, every clinic, every slum in this godforsaken city. I want every analyst, every programmer, and every asset of this company to be focused on this one thing. Do you understand me? Find her." His voice was no longer that of a CEO. It was the desperate plea of a drowning man. Without another word, he stormed out of the room, leaving Dr. Evans and a terrified Mr. Harrison standing amidst the wreckage. The next few hours were a state of controlled chaos. The top floor of Vance Tower, usually a serene hub of global finance, transformed into a frantic, high-tech command center. Traders were pulled from their desks to scan social media. Security experts spent hours poring over high-definition footage. Arthur was a man possessed. He paced his office like a caged animal, Maya's humiliated face and her father's dying words playing on a torturous loop in his mind. Promise me. You'll look out for them. He had built his entire life on the principles of logic and control. Still, now he was completely, utterly powerless, adrift in a sea of his own making. We have a possible lead, sir, Harrison said, rushing in an hour later, breathless, holding a tablet. Facial recognition got a partial match from a traffic cam near the tower. We traced her to a bus route heading downtown. We're tracking the bus's path, but she could have gotten off anywhere. It's not enough, Vance snapped, his voice hoarse. What about the hospitals? She said her brother was sick. We're cross-referencing all pediatric patients named Leo with the surname Turner. It's slow. There are dozens in the city system. Dozens. While they sifted through digital names on a list, Leo was running out of time. The thought was a physical pain, a lance of ice in his chest. Impulsively, Vance grabbed his coat. I can't just sit here. Sir, where will you go? Harrison protested. To where it happened, Vance said grimly. To the last place I saw her. He went down to the street and stood on the exact spot where he'd thrown the money. For him, it had become a crime scene. Passers-by recognized him, stopped, and stared, whispering to one another. The powerful CEO, the man from the viral videos, was now standing on the pavement, looking utterly lost. He scanned the crowds, irrationally, desperately hoping she might reappear. He even approached a street vendor whose cart he'd passed without a glance for years. Did you see the girl? Vance asked, his voice strained. This morning? A young woman with a folder? The vendor, stunned to be addressed by the building's owner, just shook his head, intimidated. His phone rang, shrill and demanding. It was Harrison. Sir, we found him. Not her, but the brother. Leo Turner, admitted to St. Jude's Public Hospital, pediatric wing. Relief, potent and immediate, washed over Vance, but a cold wave of dread immediately followed it. St. Jude's was notoriously underfunded and overcrowded. A place for the people the city forgot. I'm on my way, he said, and without thinking started running. He hailed a taxi, disregarding his expensive suit and polished Italian shoes. He finally understood. Real power wasn't a stock portfolio or a skyscraper. It was the ability to help someone who needed it. And for 20 years, he'd had all the power in the world and had done nothing. He burst through the beleaguered doors of St. Jude's. It was exactly as he'd feared. Dim, flickering lights, the overpowering smell of antiseptic and despair. He found the pediatric wing and ran down the hall until he saw the nameplate on a door, L. Turner. He stopped, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the small glass window in the door, he saw Leo asleep, looking impossibly small and frail in the large hospital bed. And beside him in a hard plastic chair sat Maya. She was staring at her brother, her expression one of deep, exhausted sorrow. In her lap, her hands were methodically, obsessively smoothing out the crumpled $100 bills he had thrown at her, as if trying to iron out the humiliation, to make the price of her shame mean something. The sight shattered what little was left of Arthur's pride. He pushed the door open, Maya's head snapped up. When she saw him, her whole body went stiff with a jolt of fear and anger. She stood up in one fluid motion, putting herself between him and her brother like a lioness protecting her cub. What do you want? She whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. Haven't you done enough? Did you come here to gloat, or do you want your money back? Arthur opened his mouth, but the commanding voice he had used his whole life was gone. The powerful CEO had vanished. In his place was a man hollowed out by 2 decades of regret. He took a shaky step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. No, he finally managed to say, his voice thick with unshed tears. I'm here to apologize. Apologize? She let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. You think a word fixes this? You think an apology helps him breathe? No, he said again, his own eyes filling. A word can't fix it. What I did? It was unforgivable. I was cruel. I was wrong. He took another tentative step. I didn't know, he whispered, the words feeling pathetic and small. Maya, I didn't know who you were. She frowned, confused. What difference does that make? You shouldn't treat anyone like that. You're right, he said, his voice finally breaking. It shouldn't matter. But it does. It does because I knew your father. Maya froze, her hostile stance faltering. My father? David Turner, Arthur said, the name feeling both sacred and profane on his lips. 20 years ago. There was a car crash. A fire. He saved my life, Maya. He pulled me from the wreck just before it exploded. He died saving me. He saw the shock register on her face, her anger slowly giving way to a stunned, painful understanding. His last words. He made me promise, Arthur confessed, the shame of it all washing over him. He gave me your picture. You were just a baby. He made me promise to look out for you, and I broke that promise. I sent money, like a coward, and I walked away. I built my life on the life he gave me, and I forgot. I forgot my debt. Until today, until I saw his name in your brother's file. The confession hung in the sterile air between them. Maya stared at him, her mind reeling. My father? She whispered, the question full of a lifetime of loss. He was a hero, Arthur said, tears now streaming freely down his face. And I have dishonored his memory every single day for 20 years. What I did to you this morning, I am so sorry. He didn't offer help. He didn't make commands. He begged for the chance to give it a try. Please, he pleaded, his voice stripped of all its authority, all its power. Let me fix this. Let me keep my promise. Not for me, for him. For your father. And for Leo. Maya looked from the weeping, broken billionaire to her sleeping brother, whose breaths were shallow but steady. The fight went out of her, replaced by a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't completely alone. An enemy had impossibly become an ally, and maybe it wasn't too late. In the quiet of that hospital room, something profound shifted. This was no longer about money or medicine, pride or humiliation. It was about a debt of honor finally being paid, and a broken man starting the long, arduous journey of piecing his own humanity back together. Arthur moved with a speed and ferocity he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. Within the hour, a top medical team from the Sterling Medical Foundation was at St. Jude's. Leo was transferred by a private, state-of-the-art ambulance to the Sterling Medical Center, the very institution Arthur had been considering funding. He funded the entire experimental program on the spot. His signature on the check a silent, binding apology to David Turner, but he didn't stop there. He found Maya and Leo a quiet, sunlit apartment overlooking a park, a world away from their crumbling, shadowed walk-up. He set up a trust fund to ensure Maya could focus on her brother and her future, insisting it was 20 years of back pay for the debt he owed her father. She refused to take a penny for herself, so they created the David Turner Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing life-saving medical care to children from low-income families. Maya became its director. Her fierce, protective compassion now served as a guiding force for good. Arthur Vance was a changed man. A quiet, constant humility replaced the arrogance that had been his armor. He spent less time in the boardroom and more time at the hospital, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a friend. He would sit by Leo's bedside for hours, reading stories about superheroes, listening intently to detailed plans about jetpacks and future adventures. He discovered that the fulfillment he got from seeing a smile on Leo's face was something no billion-dollar deal could ever provide. 6 months later, on a bright, sunny afternoon, Arthur and Maya stood together watching as Leo, his color returned and his energy renewed, took his first few tentative steps in the hospital's rehabilitation garden. He was weak, but he was smiling, his face tilted up towards the sun. The treatment was working. He was going to live. Arthur turned to Maya, his eyes full of a gratitude she now understood. Your father, he said quietly, would be so incredibly proud of you. Maya smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile that reached her eyes. He'd be proud of you too, Arthur. You finally kept your promise. Arthur Vance learned the hard way that a person's true worth isn't measured by their bank account or the towers they build in their name, but by the compassion in their heart and the courage to right their most profound wrongs. He had spent a lifetime chasing success, only to find that real wealth lies not in accumulation. Still, In connection with the debts of kindness, we choose to honor. Because in the end, we aren't remembered for what we owned, but for what we gave. And the most valuable, most powerful thing you can ever give someone is a second chance. At Hidden Struggles, we go deeper, where emotion meets evidence and drama reveals the system. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.